What is going on, everybody? I'm very, very excited today because we have a very special guest, Larry Krueger, Bay Area radio legend. How are we doing today, Larry?
Brad, I'm doing great, man. When you said I have exciting news, big guest, I'm thinking, man, who's joining us? Glad to be here, man. Become a huge fan of your stuff. I've been following you on Twitter for a while. I've had you on our show, and I really appreciate you having me on. I'm loving the YouTube thing.
Absolutely, man. It's a blast. It was a blast on your show. I'm glad we can get you on over here. But again, for a lot of the listeners that we do have, not everyone is rooted in the Bay Area. So, could you maybe give a little bit of your background
Sure.
and how you've made it to where you are today, and a little bit about your YouTube channel and what you're doing with it?
Well, I'm a former Canadian Football League scout with the Sacramento Gold Miners back in the mid-90s. They kind of flirted with the American expansion there for a few years, and I worked with the Gold Miners, and it was a total NFL staff: Kay Stevenson, Joe Woolley, Rick Mueller, others, Bill Urbanek, Bill Bradley. All those guys left and went to the NFL. I said the pros, but it was actually, obviously CFL's pro football too. But
Right.
a lot of those guys after 1 year jumped back to the NFL, and Joe Woolley brought me to Arizona, and I did some regional scouting for them on the West Coast, and then just kind of fell into the radio career and got away from scouting when I met my wife and started my family. And suddenly being on the road 38 weeks a year wasn't the coolest thing, and it was like I wanted to be home and I wanted to have a little bit more normal 9 to 5. And so I got into the radio, and then of course been doing sports radio since really 1995. I still do some consulting as far as personnel evaluation for friends of mine around the NFL, but just on a contract basis. And, the draft is kind of I'm always big on the college side of scouting, though I did advanced scouting. I did quality control. I did pro personnel. And I've done collegiate personnel. So I really enjoy the collegiate personnel part of it the most, the draft and everything that happens around the draft. And so, now I'm doing the YouTube show and I'm loving it, man. Absolutely loving it. The Krug show on YouTube. And we've been up for about 4 to 6 weeks in that range. And we've got about 4,000 subscribers, and we're really doing live streams. I'm doing some post-game stuff, and I'm doing a lot on the draft, a lot on the Niners, and I'm just loving it. Every time I hit the mic, every time I'm talking to the group, whether it be in the chats or, people who reach out to me on all these different social media platforms, I can really tell that they're hardcore Niners, they're hardcore NFL, and they really want to know not just like the media stuff. They want to know from a scout's perspective, a real football perspective on football. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to the table, man. Just real football. Don't get caught up in the Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo soap opera. I probably would rather talk about the kid Poe from Mercer than talk about Jimmy and more Jimmy and more Jimmy. But I'm just loving it. And I did the Niners pre and post game show for about a decade, and have good relationships with people in the organization, talk to people in the organization almost every day. So I feel like I've got something to add that's not necessarily in the space. What you do, what attracted me to you actually was that when I started reading your tweets, I could tell, Brad, that you weren't just a guy who was like a fan, and there's nothing against fans, but that you have a professional background in this, and some of the content that you put out there is really, really high level. And I thought, man, if there's room for quality content, that's where I want to be. So I'm loving it, and it's been a ton of fun.
Absolutely, man. When you had me on your show, I think we spent almost a solid hour on undrafted free agents.
Right,
And I was
right.
loving it. I was like, when does this ever happen? Like, we didn't even start with the drafted picks. We just went undrafted
We
for
went
an
undrafted.
hour, and we were firing away. It was awesome. And then you could totally, I could hear your experience. I could see all your perspectives and where you were coming from. So you could totally tell that scout in you still there. I do have a question though, just about the whole scouting thing, because I always had this like vision of like when I stopped playing football, like I would love to be a scout, but how do you get into it? What is it like? But what was your experiences like being a scout? Were you on the road all the time? Was it one of those situations where you're literally grinding the tape? What was that like being a scout?
Well, I mean, there's different kinds of scouting. So I was in Sacramento with the gold miners. I did what they call quality control, which you've heard before, and all that means is self scouting. So what do we do on first down? What do we do on second down? What do we do between inside the red zone or backed up into our own side of the field, or what in the CFL it's a 3-down league. So what do you do on first down? What do you do on second down? As far as percentage and formation, and so I would oftentimes just look like at the time it was the mid 90s. So let's say the gold miners were playing Calgary next week. I would go study Calgary this week and I'd watch 5 to 8 films. And at the time they had Doug Flutie was their starter. They had a guy named Calvillo as the backup, and like Jeff Garcia was their third guy. And then you would have to study. Jeff. Yeah, Jeff Garcia was just breaking in at that point. And so you'd study their negotiation list, because that's the group of guys that they control. That's kind of the Canada practice squad, but it's much larger. And so a lot of times it was just getting a handle on the personnel. And then I would write a full report for the game plan that week. And the game plan or the report would include personnel evaluation on Calgary, man by man, up and down the roster, and then their percentages. What do they do on first down? What do they do on second down? What do they do in this formation? What do they do in that formation? And so you're just really breaking a football game down into a million pieces. So that's the advanced scouting quality control job, and it's labor intensive. Now it's done through computers. We did it all by hand. So that's that. Then there's college scouting, and you're on the road and it's isolated. And there's most of the guys that I was, sitting with and conversing with I was 25, 27 in that range. They were 75 or 65, they were older guys.
You were the young buck back then.
I was the young buck, and they used to laugh at me and, find me. Larry's totally gullible because he hasn't lived. And it was very isolated. I was traveling through Canada and also then looking at American college players as well. And I had with the Cardinals, I had the West Coast region, and I did pro personnel. That was at the dawn of free agency. I went there. So they were looking to beef up their pro personnel departments, because at that point, this was the beginning of free agency. So once you were drafted to the Chiefs, the Niners really didn't care about you. But then once free agency hit, they had to have a handle on every team's total roster for free agency. And so that's labor intensive. So they hired a bunch of people. I was one of them, and I just looked at pro personnel. But my real love and what I think I'm best at is looking at college personnel.
That's awesome, man. That's a lot of work. Right?
It is. And it's a lot of pressure. That was the other thing. I thought it would be fun, and it is fun. But the expectation, Brad, is that you're going to be right 95% of the time. Ooh. And so you better be right. And people evaluating people is fraught with human error, and there's all kinds of things that if many
variables,
there's a million variables. And that's the other thing too I learned, is that old people know a ton. I've got more respect for older people from having scouted, and older people know tons. Younger people know a lot less. And I got an education, and I would just huddle up with these old scouts, and I'd buy them lunch and I'd buy them dinner. And I would just say, hey man, can you coach me up, so to speak. And so many of them were willing to, that they would oftentimes make me swear that I would never tell that they coached me up, because sharing data is actually that's not part of the gig. You don't share data because you're competing against these guys.
Right.
But these guys did share a lot with me as far as just different things that tell you about the player. What we're all looking for, Brad, is the essence of the player. Anybody can say 4'3", 6'2", 190, 35-inch vertical, 609 3 cone. You can make your eyes bleed with all that information, but really what it comes down to is tell me the essence of the football player. And if you can find that essence of the football player, what he really is going to do for you, that's when it's time to write the report and send it in.
I mean, we all love the measurables, right? That's what sometimes attracts us to these prospects, but you cannot forget, you have to scout the person. And if not, the most importantly, you got to figure out what makes them tick. Are they in it because they like the glitz and the glamour, or they're in it because they love the game and they are going to work at their craft and they're going to grind at it. Those are the difference makers. And you can actually maybe even take a flyer on a guy who might not have the craziest athletic traits and might not be like jumping out off the tape. But when you get into understanding who they are as a person and you start to figure out like, who is this guy? You can then project, well, this is a type of guy that we can see growing within our system. He might not be ready now, but we could see him theoretically grow if we give him the right coaching, we give him the right environment, right? Those types of things.
And so much of it's too about your non-measurables. Like I've never met a good man-to-man cover corner who wasn't so cocky that you just hated the guy 5 seconds later. It's like they're the hardest guys to like because they're just so damn cocky and they've got such belief in themselves. But then you realize that's what you need to survive on the island, backpedaling and trying to mirror Jerry Rice up and down the field. You need that level of cockiness. For the line, I used to look for the wrestling background and the fighting background, because ultimately you could have all the measurables in the world. If you're not a tough guy, you don't like to fight, if you're not if you don't have the leverage, like the wrestler understands leverage. Mm-hmm. And it's like, people don't realize it, but if you're a wrestler, you have the equivalent of a doctorate in leverage. And the line of scrimmage, you played O-line, it's about leverage. And so I always, if I found a guy who I thought was a good player, but he had some rough edges, but if I found out that guy had a wrestling background, and if I could see examples of toughness on the film and leverage, I always wanted that player. So that's just a couple of the things. There's a bunch of things. I mean, and then you have to adjust as the sport adjusts. I mean, the safety that NFL scouts were looking for in 2000 is not the safety that NFL scouts are looking for in 2022. So you have to understand how the game has changed and what kinds of players you need to succeed in an ever-changing landscape.
Like Whitner for the 49ers back in the Harbaugh day, phenomenal safety, and he fit exactly what Fangio was trying to execute in regards to his scheme and being the tone setter and all those types of things, where he might not have, he was a great player, but he might be used differently in today's game, or have to adjust, potentially some of the way he's tackling, the way he lines up players to come and hit them. So, right, you have to be able to kind of be fluid in a sense and just kind of grow with the times.
Totally. And then also you got to find out, here's the other thing too. It's not the Olympics or anything. It's not. So you got to find out. I always like to start with who's productive. Let's work back from productive, because you can sit there and try to find, guys with measurables. And then of those guys that have the measurables, now let's go another search and figure out if they're productive. I like to find out who's productive. And then among the productive guys, let's look at the measurables. And I think that when you start with production, collegiate production, it's kind of like the Baltimore Ravens. I think the Ravens do it the best. Ozzie Newsome, now Eric DeCosta. And what they do is they draft great college football players, and they hope that they'll be great NFL players. And that's really the key, I think, is it's a game, and it's a game of skill, and it's not just because you were big, fast, strong doesn't mean you're going to be good. The old, we used to have those saying, and I'm sure you've heard this one, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. You know what I mean? It's like, you can look the part, and that's great, when we're getting off the bus, but, when the game starts, I actually need guys who can make plays on both sides of the ball.
Absolutely. And, when we look at the San Francisco 49ers and we look at some of their better players, you look at guys like Deebo Samuel, who might not be the biggest height, weight, speed guys, but what kind of sets them apart? You can even look at George Kittle, too, and his maturation from a fifth-round blocking tight end to one of the premier tight ends who actually almost re-changed the position in a sense. A lot of what made them really special is, what's in here and how they really bring that together and are able to just be physical forces, not only with what they have, but it's almost like they take it to another level just because of their mentality alone.
Totally. And also, to me, I used to have a thing called how much do they love the process? If I ask 100 NFL prospects, do you love the process? Literally 99 of them are going to say, I love the process, because they know that's the right answer. But then literally when you go watch an NFL team, there are guys who have been in the facility for 5 hours and they look like they feel like they've been there for 5 minutes and they're going to put in another 5 hours and they're not looking to leave. There's other guys who are looking to leave before they even put their key that gets them into the building in their pocket. They're like, oh man, how much longer? Right. So you have to, especially if you're a free safety, a middle linebacker, a quarterback, anybody who's wearing the green dot on defense, anybody who touches the ball on offense, you better be wed to the process of pro football, which is the lifting, the dieting, the commitment, the film study, everything that goes into it. People think of these guys as like it's North Dallas 40. No, these guys show up with briefcases and laptops, and they're professional. And they will respect anybody, scout or coach, that can make them better. If you can make a football player better and he's wed to the process, man, you're going to have a friend for life, because he's going to look at you as somebody who can help him put money in his pocket and feed his family. So I always looked at the process, and a lot of times I talk to the film guys. The guy who's the film guy on campus, because he'll tell you the guys who want more films, and I issued this film and I handed out that, and they'll tell you these are the guys that truly love the game. And I mean, it's crazy, Brad, how many guys that are good in college, and then another guy's equally good, but one guy loves the process and the other guy just kind of endures it. Mm-hmm. The guy who loves the process will succeed. The guy who endures it may succeed.
I'll tell my one recent story, and I could talk scouting with you all day. I freaking love it. I eat this stuff up. But one recent story that I kind of had that kind of made me pause on a prospect that I loved throughout the year. I really like Kadarius Toney. When I saw Kadarius Toney in that Florida offense, how dynamic he was. I even had an opportunity to go watch him up close at the Senior Bowl and all that kind of stuff. But when I started to do the next leg of, because we would look at Kadarius Toney, New York Giants, former first round pick, phenomenal athlete, measurables off the charts. But I remember listening to this podcast. He went on with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. And they asked him, because he was like to rap on, like he did rapping too. Which yeah. You have your passions outside of football. That's fine. But they'd asked him, they're like, hey, what happens if your rap career pops off? Would you go pursue that? And he was just like, I mean, if it does, then yeah, we'll see where it goes. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if that's the answer you necessarily want to give when you're in the essentially biggest job interview of your career. And again, guys like you and me, we want to hear football, football, football. And we understand you have lives outside of football. We can quantify that as well. But the fact that he was just so open about, like, yeah, I mean, if rap took off, that would be cool. I would go after that. I was like, and
so maybe football to him is a means to an end.
Yeah, and he's getting floated in a trade now after just 1 year with the Giants. So it's more about, like you said, it's more about scouting the measurables. It's also scouting the person, what makes them tick, and all that type of stuff, which I freaking love. And I could talk about this for days. Well, let's talk about 49ers draft a little bit. When we look at the actual drafted prospects, who came away being your favorite prospect out of this haul that the 49ers got?
Well, it's interesting. The more I watch Drake Jackson, the more I like him. I mean, I really do. As far as he's got some uncoachable things. He's got a first step that you can't coach and you can't really even develop. I mean, that's just, you're either born with that or you're not. And he's got that. He's got an incredible first step. As NFL DNs will work on their get off for hours and hours and hours. It's really the key element of that position is your get off. He gets off the ball, man. This guy gets off the ball and he's like shot out of a cannon. And then he also has this flexibility to turn and flatten, and to, when he dips and turns his hips and flattens to the quarterback, some guys, it takes like almost a step and a half. This guy's there in like a half step. So he's got this unbelievable ability to flatten and explode to the quarterback. Now, the only thing I would say I love him. I just don't know what weight is ideal. I think I'd like to see him at 260, but I'm not really sure because he played at 270 as a freshman. He had his best year, but there were other factors. When I went into that freshman film, it had more to do, I thought, with the other guys who played on that line with him than him. So I kind of like him a little lighter than 270. I like him more like, 255, 260, where he's got that unbelievable. Yeah, he's strictly a speed rusher. And people say, well, if he sounds so great, why do you go at 61? Because he's not good against the run. He really isn't. And he's got some issues anchoring against the run. I haven't seen him with a ton of counter moves back inside. When he gets stoned on his initial rush, there's not a lot that comes off of that initial rush. That all needs to be coached up. But what I love is the motor and the first step and the bend and the ability to flatten to the quarterback with no wasted steps. And very few of those things you can coach. So I love Jackson's ability. And to me, I think the impact is going to be significant because you got Bosa on one end. They had other guys. I mean, the K-State kid and, the guy they brought in from the Colts, Teray, and there's other guys.
We got a bunch of different guys.
Yeah, you got other guys, but none of those guys have what D Ford had in his prime and what this kid has, and that is the motor and the first step combo. So I really think it's going to be really intriguing. All he's got to do in this wide nine, front is just shoot up the field, read the quarterback, rush in your lane, keep contain, and just try to with your speed make that quarterback step into the lap of Armstead and Kinlaw. And I think he's going to be able to do it. So I think as far as impact on the season, I got to say Drake Jackson, because I think the impact opposite Bosa is going to be significant. And I think if I'm Eric Armstead by the end of the year is going to be buying Drake Jackson a Rolex, because I think.
Do you think Eric is going to be playing more? Because obviously with some of the injuries, Kinlaw was put on the shelf early last year, so they kicked Eric inside to the 3-tech. Do you think Eric is going to live more on the 3-tech, especially with the edge rushers like we've talked about, Omenihu, Ebukam, and of course the new addition of Drake Jackson? Does it feel like he's going to find more of a home on the interior defensive line?
Yeah, no doubt. Because as every year that goes by, the rundown defenders inside are being replaced with pass rushers who can also play the run, and that's really what Armstead is. He can play the run. He's actually really strong. He's functionally incredibly strong, and has great leverage for a 6'7" player. I mean, tremendous leverage. But I think his days. Anytime you see Eric Armstead at end, that means there's been an assortment of injuries and things have gone wrong, because he's not going to bend the edge. I mean, right. Can he rush the passer? Yeah, he can rush the passer a little bit. I mean, he's 6'7", he's got long arms. He's played out there before. He's got some experience, but he's really more going to set the edge against the run, and he's not going to give you what you're looking for. I think it's a rush and cover game, and now you need rushers inside. And I think I almost feel like Kinlaw may be, part of an older era, and I'm kind of a little bit concerned about, what his contribution is going to be, because unless he improves his foot speed and his quickness, he's just going to be a 2-down guy who absorbs blockers and keeps guys off of the linebackers. He's not really going to be a pass rusher. And I think they drafted him in the first round hoping that he's both, right? Hoping that he'd be Buckner. And it doesn't seem like that's going to be in the cards.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have a lot of high hopes for Javon.
You had him on. I saw that you had him on your show.
Yeah, he was great, man. I was impressed by the kid. I was like, I call him a kid, but he's a massive human being. But he was a really great interview. And I think the light bulb went off for him. I think he, with being injured, they finally were able to go in and fix that issue he was having with his knee. He's talked about how he's feeling the best he's ever felt. And we've started to see things that kind of match that. He looks like he's really slimmed down to kind of like, I think your point, to try to be a little bit more quicker, try to be a little bit more explosive off the snap, provide, because I think when we saw Kinlaw coming out of South Carolina, he was a good run stuffer, and at the college level he could get by guys with just pure brute strength. But we understand when you get to the NFL level, there's so much technique involved that if you're not like technically advanced enough, like an offensive lineman will be able to mitigate any type of move you throw at them if you're kind of at a baseline level. So I think Kinlaw is still a work in progress, but I think he's trending in the right direction. So I'm pretty excited to see what he does, but it's still TBD at this point. But I'm also very, very intrigued by Drake Jackson, especially getting him with Krueger, because it does feel like, and I have a very similar evaluation as well. Feels like the sky's the limit with the kid. He has the things that you can't teach, the traits, the measurables. But when it comes to the technique side of it and the things you can mature at as a pass rusher, feels like he can add like 2-3 levels of pass rush moves and different things to his bag where he could be like light years ahead of what he is now.
We're talking about Jackson now.
Yeah, Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge upside. The other thing we got to remember is Jackson's walking into a line where Bosa commands a double team. Kinlaw strength alone demands a double team. Armstead, when he's really playing at a high level, he can command a double team. So you're playing on a line with 3 other guys who all can command double teams. Guess what? You're getting the one-on-one until you can prove otherwise. So I think Jackson could not have walked into a better situation for himself, because a lot of times, high picks, they come with some celebration to them, and sometimes they're not ready to, be chipped or have that attention of the offensive line. And on this defensive line, he won't get it. He won't get it. The line will slide towards Bosa, and if Jackson can just do what Jackson does, which is get up out of his stance and get into the backfield and rev that motor, I think it's going to be great. I mean, the 49ers look at their defense as a rush and cover thing, that they've always emphasized the rush side of it. And I think that's smart. I really do. And I think if you go back a couple of years when the Eagles won the bowl with the Foles, go look at that Eagles line. There were 2 things that Eagles team did that the league's starting to copy now. They went for it on 4th down a lot, like a much higher percentage than the rest of the league. And the Ravens copied that last year. More teams will copy that this year and going forward. The analytics are going to tell you that going for it on 4th and short is actually smarter than punting. So they went for it a lot on 4th down, and every guy on their defensive front, for the most part, could rush the passer. They had a lot of pass rushers, and I think that's kind of the future.
And it's really cool, too, because based on that concept, I think we looked at Nick Bosa last year, and I think he ranked as the most double-teamed edge defender in the NFL last year.
Right.
So if you can utilize Drake Jackson to get those one-on-one matchups on the outside, because you're exactly right. They're going to slide the protection towards Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, and it gives an opportunity for a guy like Jackson to really thrive. So it's going to be interesting, and to see if he creates enough pressure that we start seeing maybe them slide protection towards Jackson, and we can, scheme up one-on-ones for Nick Bosa. It feels like there's an opportunity where this defensive line, again, with the just sheer numbers that they've added in free agency or through the draft, feels like that's going to be yet again probably the strongest positional group on the team. Would you say?
I totally think so. And then also the combination of they drafting a guy with a really good motor, and then they're playing him. They almost play their D line like hockey lines. Like, you go play with your hair on freaking fire, and then when you're gassed, just raise your hand. We'll get 4 new guys in there. I mean, I was looking at their line. Let's just say Bosa, Kinlaw, Armstead, Jackson are the ones. Ebukam, Ridgeway, Givens, and Teray, maybe your 2s. Willis, Kerry Hyder, Kalia Davis, if he's healthy, Omenahue are your 3s. And then Alex Barrett, who I like, Mo Hurst, who's got talent, Atkins from Fresno State, and Chris Slayton. I mean, technically they've got 4 entire lines there. And so so Coach Eric is like, hey, play incredibly hard. Play as hard as you can, rev your motor as hard as you possibly can. And then we're going to, as hard as you normally play, we are going to push you to play that much harder. And then come off the field and then let somebody else sprint. So I think their D-line, on paper at least, has the potential to overwhelm.
Oh man, I can't wait. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. Let's go to the next pick in the draft, and they took a running back. Was that a surprise to you that they went running back at 93? And what do you think about the pick in Ty Davis Price?
I love the idea of going dynamic wide receiver, dynamic running back. Like, it's funny. I had the Niner list of needs, and I had edge rusher, interior rusher. Now they, have a pretty deep defensive line, but I know how much they emphasize their line. So I looked at those needs as edge rusher, interior rusher, and then free safety or nickel corner, center or guard. But then I thought, really when I started looking at these positions, I thought, well, they just almost went to the Super Bowl with Tom Compton and Daniel Brunskill. What do they really need? Do they really need Cam Jurgens that much? No, they need a more dynamic running back and a more, I don't want to say dynamic, more of a fast vertical threat, space creating wide receiver. And I thought the second and third picks really addressed what I viewed as severe needs, which was, I like Mitchell, but I don't see dynamic. I like Sermon. I like Jeff Wilson. I like these guys. They're all solid, but there's not a dynamic player. And that's why they use Debo in the backfield, because he is dynamic. And then wide receiver wise, everybody's an underneath guy. Ayuk runs the best of their group, but they were all guys that operated underneath, and there wasn't the guy who runs off the coverage. So teams guarded them in like a 12 to 15 yard box, and their receivers.
It was pretty crazy to watch.
It really was.
They would dare the 49ers to throw outside, and they wouldn't do it.
They didn't have the quarterback to do it. And also, there wasn't the vertical threat to scare anybody. So what I loved about Danny Gray is that he's so fast. He had the 4.33 measurable as far as the time, but then that time doesn't always equate to field fast. When I watched him, I thought this is Tyreek Hill kind of speed. And so I thought he'd run in the 4.2s. When he ran 4.33, I was like, yeah, okay. Maybe it wasn't his best performance, because I think he's more like a 4.29 guy. Because when I watched him, to me, he looks faster. He looked like a guy who runs in the 4.2s. So I thought the fact they went dynamic running back with some speed and some size, and then dynamic wide receiver with some toughness and some vertical ability and some real scary, 2 steps full speed. That's what Danny Gray is. I like those picks. Gray's going to create a ton of space, and the Niners want to win games. And so if you want to win games, you got to have a dynamic running back who can run it between the tackles. And if you looked at the yards per carry between the tackles for Elijah Mitchell and Trey Sermon, we're talking about 2 yards a carry. They didn't have that player, and that's why they used Debo. So I don't know about Ty Davis Price. The sample size is small, right, but I like LSU players, and I watched the Florida game live, and so he rumbled in that game with 34 carries for 280 yards or whatever it was. They still haven't tackled him. So I like the pickup of Davis Price, and I really liked the Georgia Tech running back they got after the draft, Jordan Marion. And then I really liked the Hawaii kid that they supposedly worked out, Calvin Turner, who, could be kind of like a smaller version of Debo. He's a runner. He's a receiver. He's a playmaker. And I saw the Ravens and the Niners both invited him to rookie minicamp. Hopefully, that tells you right there you're beating down the right door, right? Because Eric DeCosta is one of the best. I hope they can land him. I hope they can sign him and keep him from going to Baltimore.
Absolutely. And as we know, with the running back, with the wide receiver, they're going to need enough time. They're going to need enough holes to be able to be opened up on that front line. So with the 49ers, they went with 2 offensive linemen, with Burford and the kid Zakel out of Fordham. And they also were able to get Poe from Mercer, and they're able to get Donovan West and Schluter. I believe it was from Minnesota.
Yeah, left tackle for the Golden Gophers.
Yeah, and I actually have been starting to do a little bit of digging around him, and I'm starting to be impressed with him. So what was your overall takeaway of the way the 49ers addressed the offensive line in the draft? And maybe is there an indication of Alex Max retiring? Maybe he's coming back. Just kind of your overall thoughts on the O-line unit.
Well, they didn't get help this year. Like, I don't think any of I looked at 5 guys, the 3 guys they got after the draft, the 2 guys they got in the draft. I don't think any of those 5 guys is ready to go. If I had to say which guy is most ready to go, it might be the guy Schluter that you're talking about, because he came out of the Big Ten and he has experience at left tackle and he was well coached. And he's got some versatility to him and he played at a pretty high level. So it might be him, believe it or not. But I loved it from the standpoint of they were really thin there last year. I mean, when you're signing Tom Compton and he's starting at right tackle and you've got a Brunskill Compton right side of your O-line, I mean, that's you're risking things there. So I love the depth. The UTSA Burford, the long arm tackle. I'm not sure if he's a left tackle. He might be a guard, but he's aggressive. And I think a year from now, he's going to be, and he's got long arms and he's tenacious. And so I really liked him. Zakel, I had a guy who actually had that part of the country up in the Northeast and told me then this guy is tough as nails and they loved his makeup. But it's a major progression asking him to move to center in the NFL. So he's not ready to roll. So I don't think either of those guys are ready to roll. Jason Poe, I think, has great strength. I think you could plug him in at center right now, and he's athletic enough to hold his own. But, small school, big transition, position change, potentially, he's probably not ready to go. And then Donovan West is interesting because, 310 pounds, really good run blocker. Another guy who's got good leverage, plays with good leverage. He actually might be the closest to be, it's probably either him or Schluter that are probably the most ready. But to be honest, I think all these guys in an ideal world get a redshirt year, but they've improved their depth there immeasurably.
It was funny. So I'm doing my research, and of course, when I was able to get the tape, I wanted to watch USC versus ASU, and just when I got into it, I would say 2/3 of my notes were Donovan West notes, like in favor of him. Of course, Drake Jackson was out there, but the things that we've talked about, you could see, if he wasn't winning on his first pass rush move, he was kind of getting locked up a little bit. So you didn't see a ton of impact plays from Drake Jackson, but I just was watching the tape and it was just note after note after note from Donovan West and his just winning, whether it was blitz pickup, he was reach blocking outside shaded defensive tackles, getting to second level, getting pancakes, pulling, all the different types of things. He does and I'm still trying to figure out how he went undrafted. Do you have any insight or maybe any understanding of why he went undrafted?
No, in fact, it's funny. I have like 3 phone calls out to different guys asking that exact question. It's hilarious that because that's all when when a guy is undrafted, who some people project in the 2nd or 3rd round, it's not happenstance, there's a reason. There's a reason. And usually the film shows you the reason. I couldn't find it on the film. So, so that kind of tells me that maybe it's character, maybe it's situational. Sometimes a road scout just, maybe it filed a report that didn't sit well or was somehow, I'll say this. It's not readily apparent to me right now why because I'm looking at a player who's pretty strong as a run blocker, as you said, has the foot the foot movements to be able to actually get out and get outside the tackle box and make some plays, and you could pull him around. I like the strength. of the athlete. Now he's not the most, he doesn't look good. Like if you watched him at the combine, they were better. He doesn't have the perfect body. He's got, so a lot of times it's a body beautiful thing,
Yeah,
and
totally. And I was at the combine. I was standing 2 feet from him, and I had the same thoughts. And I could see how, like, you see the entire crop, and you're like, he looks like he's like he's a size down. Even though the measurables read 6'3", 6'4", 300, 310 pounds, he looked like a different size than someone else who was 6'4", 310 pounds. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, well, he
you
doesn't
kind
have
of
a
see it.
frame. He doesn't have the big hulking shoulders that you look like. He's more, but I'll say this.
But he's a player.
I liked the tenaciousness. That's what I liked.
Yeah.
This guy, and I, the other thing I really liked about him is that there were more than a few offensive linemen. I don't like linemen who, if you see them out of season, they have a more than a 5-pound difference either way in what they play at. Your walking around weight better be damn close to your playing weight in the NFL, because if it's not, that either means that you eat and drink too much and you have a hard time with discipline and pushing away and maintaining your weight, or it also means that a lot of times these guys have a hard time keeping weight on. And if your walk around weight's 275 and you're playing at 310, and you've got to work like a dog to get from 275 to 310, then that tells me you're probably going to have a 5-year career at most. If your walk around weight is 305 and you play at 310, you might have a 10, 12-year career. I mean, to me, that's significant. And to me, I liked what West is. The weight that you see him play at, I bet you if you saw him in May, that's his walk-around weight.
I would agree with that. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I personally didn't really know like what some of these obviously we see all the before and after pictures of these offensive linemen, Joe Staley, Joe Thomas, when they're playing and then they get out, they're like shed half their body weight. I was able to listen in on a couple podcasts of some of these offensive line. I think it was actually Brunskill and George Kittle on Kittle's podcast, and they were both going back and forth talking about what they have to do to keep on weight. And I was like, that's insane. Like they're like, I'm on an intense eating schedule. I eat this many times a day, this many calories. If I don't, I lose weight. I'm like, man, that's crazy. That's a crazy life to live because I've been there at a sense. I was 6'3", 285 when I was playing. I was trying to get to that 300 mark. And it's like, so when you're actually trying to gain weight and it's difficult, it's a completely different world you live in. So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up.
And it stresses out your joints, and it's a
not
challenge.
Natural, right?
It's not natural. You're not going to be as flexible typically. To me, an ideal offensive lineman is he plays at 310. He walks around at 310. He used to be a wrestler, and now he does yoga. You know what I mean? It's like, that's like your ideal guy. He's maintaining flexibility. He understands leverage. His walk around weight is his playing weight. And he's kind of has a little bit of a nasty disposition. That's the perfect combination right there.
I like the yoga bit because, I mean, as an offensive lineman, you got to be able to sink into those hips. You have to have good balance, wide base, and you have to be able to be agile like that. So I really do like that yoga piece. But what do you think about the defensive backs that the 49ers drafted with Tariq Castro-Fields in the 6th round and also Samuel Womack out of Toledo in the 5th? Do you see one of those guys fitting, potentially a safety role, or is one of those guys, there's two of them obviously, but is one maybe slotted for a nickel role?
Well, I mean, I love Womack. I mean, the walk on to all conference. I mean, that right there, it's like, hey man, I want to shake that guy's hand. You walked on. You didn't have a scholarship, and you became an multiple time all conference player. I mean, that means he's all about it, right? I mean, that's as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't have to have anything to prove to me at that point. You just went from walk on to all conference. You care about football. So, and then when you hear the interview, and it's like, man, he's like, I'm a lockdown press man corner, and he's got that cockiness, that just ridiculous swagger. So I like Womack, and I think that Toledo program. First of all, I'm a big fan of MAC football. I like the MAC. I think that it's really, there's some really great coaches in the MAC, and there's some outstanding prospects who get passed over, and they wind up playing in the MAC. And then it's a blue collar part of the world. So it's there's not a lot of, it's not like you're walking around UCLA or SC or one of these places and the sun's shining, and you're playing in the MAC, you're playing for Ohio, or you're playing for Toledo or something. And it's like, you got to love the game, man. And you're practicing in cold. They don't have a bubble, or, there's a toughness, an inherent toughness about the MAC that I really respect. So I like that conference. Then I like the trail that the kid took. Then I love the interview. And then I haven't seen a ton of film, but what I have seen reflects the measurables. He runs in the 4.3s. He's got quickness. He's got agility. He's got balance. We used to evaluate a thing called QABs: quickness, agility, balance, and strength. And those were the real key elements, especially for guys in the perimeter. Do they have quickness, agility, balance, and strength? I really like Womack quite a bit. As far as Tariq Castro-Fields, well coached, a little stiff, and he needs to be coached up at the catch point. There were several plays in one-on-ones at Mobile where he's literally mirroring some of the best players in the class up and down the field, but at the catch point, he looks raw. He's face guarding at the catch point. He doesn't turn his head, doesn't find the ball. Those things need to be coached up. Heck, we saw it this year with the Niners' young corners. So he's played at a high level. He's played against the Ohio States and the Michigans and the top receivers and the 5-star prospects. So he's not going to be overwhelmed by it. He's got size. He's got 4.38 speed. He's got balance, but he needs refinement as far as man-to-man cover skills, and especially at the catch point. Some guys are genius at it, and they don't ever have to be coached. Some guys never get it. So it's like one of those things where to me, Tariq Castro-Fields may be a really high-level free safety, or if with a little bit of coaching, he might be an NFL corner. But what I liked is he's an NFL player at maybe 2 spots. I think he's fast enough and has enough agility to play the corner, and I think he's big enough, strong enough, and smart enough to transition inside. I don't know about his angles at safety. I mean, look at Tarvarius Moore. Tarvarius Moore is big, strong, fast, and he cannot play safety. I don't care what Kyle Shanahan says, because he takes terrible angles. Did
they just go with the measurable guy with Tarvarius Moore? And
Tarvarius Moore is a guy that, if he was driving from San Francisco to LA, I would expect to find him in Vegas. You know what I mean? Because he takes wrong angles. I mean, it's like, that angle they took on Juju Smith-Schuster in the Pittsburgh game a couple years ago, that should have been a 15-yard gain and wound up being a touchdown, because his angle was so poor that he started chasing it from behind. So Tarvarius, I think, is a jumbo corner, and maybe Castro-Fields is as well. I got it. Until you see a corner transition to safety, you don't really know if he's going to take the proper angles. Taking the proper angles at safety is a huge part of the gig. So he's got the measurables to play safety. I don't know if he has the instincts, but I like Womack, and I think Womack might be able to play right away.
Feels like Womack is going to be definitely in line for some serious snaps, especially with kind of what we've heard from the area scouts and what we've heard since the draft. It feels like it was a pretty synonymous feeling inside the building that Womack was kind of that guy that they're looking for, especially at the nickel cornerback spot, where obviously K'Wan Williams is no longer there, and you need a guy to be able to get in there and be physical and mix it up, especially when you look into in division and you look at guys like Cooper Kupp, where they love kicking them inside into that nickel, you need someone who's going to be able to match up with that. So I'm really excited about that pick as well. But what did you think about the Kalai Davis pick, the UCF defensive lineman who was taken in the 6th round?
This one, I really love this pick. Now, I don't think we're going to see him this year. That's the downside, is he's got, he's rehabbing an injury. I think he's 4 months out from surgery, maybe 5 months out from surgery. I think there's a chance that he goes on one of those NFI or PUP. I'm not sure. There's like 3 different lists, and I expect him to be on one of those lists this year. I think they'll probably wind up redshirting him, but I love the potential. Why? Because the motor is unbelievable. The quickness, the agility, the balance, the strength. He's got the quabs. He loves to play, and if you watch him, he plays fast with a high revving motor. So he's got a DJ Jones kind of body, and I've heard people say, "Oh, he's going to be great against the run." I don't know how he's going to do against the run. I think he's actually an interior rusher who reminds me a little bit of like a poor man's Warren Sapp. He's kind of a sawed-off quickness rusher inside who, he's like one of those guys that he's like liquid when you're trying to block him. I mean, if you move to the left, he moves to the right. He's got it down where he knows how to contort his frame to get narrow when he needs to get narrow and slide through holes that he never should be able to slide through. So the motor and the slitheriness, I love that player. And I had a buddy who was on that campus watching their film last year who said, "Man, this is a great kid. The coaches there love this kid." And then I heard that the Niner coaches were wowed by him as well. And you can kind of see why in the interview. He's all ball, man. He's all ball. And, like let's say, Brad, you're blocking him. If you gave him a real stiff right arm to his left shoulder, he would just kind of roll with it, and
he's
it's
probably
almost
coming down with the club right away. He's already anticipating I'm punching. He's already clubbed my arm away, and I'm like trying to regroup and replace my hands.
Well, you played O-line, so you'd be a perfect guy to talk to this point. There's so many D linemen who have the bad D linemen have what they're going to do in their head pre-snap. The great D linemen react to the offensive linemen, use their leverage against them, and they're just like, any way you block them, they're going the other way.
They have an answer for it.
They have an answer for everything. And it's not predicated on their plan. It's predicated on your movement and your leverage. And this kid plays with tremendous leverage and quickness and motor. And I can't wait to watch him. I think he's going to be a really, on this line too, he plays hard. He's going to play inside. I think he's going to replace Kentavious Street. I think he'll be a little stronger in the run game, won't be moved as much as Street, won't be moved as much as Givens. He kind of reminds me of Givens a little bit, but then he's 310. He's 310 pounds, where Givens is 280. So this guy's 30 pounds heavier than Givens, but very similar in that he whatever you do, he's got a counter for it.
I didn't know he was 30 pounds more. I thought they were probably in the same, little bit
Givens
more.
Weighs about 285. This guy's about 310.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't even know that. That's pretty
and he
good.
wore 22, by the way. So that's the other thing. When you're watching a D tackle wearing 22, you're sitting there going, what is going on here? I mean, he played linebacker. The only, I guess, one concern I would have is that he was a weak side linebacker. He was a middle linebacker. He was a Sam linebacker. Then he was a DN. Now he's a D tackle. Some guys just get bigger. So they got to make sure that he's not one of those guys, because he really doesn't have the frame to hold that much more weight than what he's at right now. Right. And I'd be concerned with him about foot problems, stress issues with his feet, ankles, knees. That would be my big concern. So I don't want him to get any bigger than 310.
Yeah, I agree with that. And he seems like he has the prerequisite strength to be able to manage where he's at. And also to guys who are very instinctual, especially on the defensive line, just like you talked to, they can use leverage to their benefit where, they don't have to be 340. They can use their smaller frame to kind of their advantage in a sense. And we saw that with DJ Jones. We've seen that with Aaron Donald. We've seen that with some other guys in the league. So I think you make a ton of phenomenal points about him. He's a guy I'm excited about, but we cannot forget about Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. What's going on with Brock? What do you see out of him? Is he more of a camp body kind of a practice squad type of guy?
I'm so conflicted here. I'm not really sure. I mean, when I watched him without studying him, just watching him, I thought, Nick Mullins plus, like Nick Mullins, but he
A
does
little
have
bit
that
more
kind of
mobile.
a little bit more mobile and also just a little bit tough. I mean, this guy's got this guy thinks of himself as a tough guy, but all I'll say is he holds the ball a little too long for my liking, and it's pretty consistent. That's the other thing too. It's like I don't know if he's trying to show everybody how tough he is, but he's got a
Shades of
little.
CJ Beathard, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Not quite that like that. I mean, that was extreme. But he's got more of an arm than Mullins. Like, yeah, and people couldn't say CJ Beathard without saying his toughness.
Right, right.
But yeah, Purdy is from the people that I know who were around that program. He's a great leader, and he had total respect. He's very smart and very tough, and likes to show you how tough he is. He will hold the ball to let his receivers work open down the field, but he's got a little bit more arm strength than Mullins. Like at first, Brad, I thought, you know what, backup quarterback. But when you see this guy zip it a little bit in the short and intermediate range, there's a little bit more heat on his ball than Nick Mullins has. I mean, Nick Mullins is more between the hashes kind of a guy. Like he
He's a good
really,
anticipatory thrower. He could
yeah,
he could see
yeah.
where it needed to be and kind of lay it in there a little bit better.
And I think this is going to be a guy that is going to be great for Trey in the film study, and he's going to be great for the Niners on the cap, because now they've got 3 cheap quarterbacks in that room, so they're paying very little, and they're going to have a guy who's played a lot of football. I mean, he's kind of the opposite of Trey in a lot of ways. Trey's a big, talented athlete who has not played a lot of football and needs to be coached up. Well, what do you want in that room with him? Ideally, you either want a veteran or you want a super heady, young guy who's played a lot of football and can impart some wisdom to him. So I like it. I like it. I think this is a guy who's going to have a lot of the answers. And I think you're going to hear coaches rave about Brock Purdy and his understanding of Shanahan's somewhat complex scheme. And so I think it's a good blend for Trey. I think he'll be a great guy to compete with Trey and to, notice the nuance. I mean, you're a football player. You know that the nuances that you have to see on film are endless. And so you need the smartest guy you could possibly have in that room, especially since your quarterback coach has never really coached the position. It would be nice if you don't have to coach up all 3 guys. Like, I've heard guys say, hey, man, I don't want to be coaching up the backup or the 3rd string guy. I don't got time for that. And I think the 49ers don't have time for that. In this case, I think that between Sudfeld and Trey, who have a relationship, and then you got Greasy, who's a first-year coach, and you got Trey, who's learning this complex system. In some ways, I think Purdy's perfect because he's just good enough to play if you need him and just flawed enough to not really be a threat to Trey.
I think that's a phenomenal point because honestly, I didn't really look at it from that standpoint because Brock Purdy has a ton of experience and he is going to be able to, I mean, he might have more experience in a sense than Trey was when he was coming out. But that's an interesting point too. And I did want to get your thoughts quickly on the noise around Trey Lance. Like, what do you make of that? We had the report that came out last week that was then clarified with the 49ers coaches are underwhelmed continually by Trey Lance. That particular reporter, I think, went on to 95.7 The Game and talked about how they were underwhelmed with his deep ball and deep ball accuracy, just from a scouting perspective, and what you've seen of Trey Lance. What are your thoughts of this continuous noise that surrounds him?
Well, it's interesting. You never, first of all, if you go and it was Matt Lombardo, and if you go research the origins of these thoughts, it's like, it's not even firsthand. It's like secondhand, and it's old.
Tweeted something.
Yeah. And it's secondhand information, and it's dated. It's dated information. And I don't think that speaks to where Trey's at right now. But what did I see with Trey, and what do I make of some of the discussions? I see an incredible prospect with the size, the speed, the mental strength, the physical strength, the love of the process. I see a phenomenal prospect, but I also see a player who needs to be coached up. It's weird because, like, Shanahan, in some ways, I feel almost called his own bluff with this pick, because is Shanahan a great quarterback? Is he a quarterback whisperer? Can he develop quarterbacks? Well, we don't know, because he's never really done it. But we do know that he's great at play calling, play sequencing, and everything that goes along with game planning and play calling. I would say he's a ruthless play caller whose sequencing of plays is borderline genius. He's right there with Walsh and the greatest offensive play callers of all time, Andy Reid and others, as far as play designing, play sequencing. Those are different skills than I'm coaching up a young raw quarterback. So when I see Trey, I see a guy who's got adjustments that need to be made on his grip on the ball. He doesn't consistently throw a spiral. I think he needs to work on layering the ball. His accuracy, I think, is going to improve as he gets more reps. He looks like he's like the best piece of clay that now has to be molded into a quarterback. And is Shanahan the guy? Is Greasy the guy? Can they mold this player into the player that he needs to be? We hope. And also, Trey has a big hand in that. The one thing with Trey is that I do know some of my best friends went on that campus, and they told me time and time again, Krug, this guy is the prototype for he loves the process. His dad, I scouted his dad, Carlton, when he was with Saskatchewan as a corner in 93, 94. And so it's a football family. Football is the family business. And so football is important to him. It's not just like, hey, I want to, all the luxury items that an NFL salary provides for me. I want to be great. And he's got that desire to be great. He needs coaching. He needs reps. He needs to smooth out his mechanics. There's things that he didn't see. He's going to see the field better this year. He's going to feel pressure. But then there's other things that I think he's advanced at. For example, Jimmy Garoppolo really was never comfortable on the play action from center, turning his back on the defense and then turning back around. When he turned back around, it was like he was seeing the defense for the first time. Trey is a phenomenal ball faker, phenomenal, and he operated out of the play action from under center. So
you gotta see that against Houston a little bit.
Yeah, and his play action fakes are terrific. If you go back to that Texans game, which was only his second start in the NFL, he twice fooled the cameraman on the mesh point on the play action, because he dips his shoulder and he carries out the fake so concretely that it fooled the cameraman. So in some ways that's very advanced. Then you look at the fact that he set his own protections. I think he's pretty advanced there. Then the one thing I think that was a key factor in them drafting him is he takes care of the football, but he also sprays it a little bit. I can see where he gears up from some of his throws, his mechanics on his
little
release.
Bounce, like hitch. He like bounces out of his hitch.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they've tried to flatten it. They're like, don't bounce, just have your feet set and then load and go. He has that, it's like a rhythm hop almost, but
and
he kind of fluctuate through that.
His movement in the pocket is absolutely fantastic. And I just think that what he needs to learn, he can learn, but they're gonna have to show some patience. He's gonna have turnovers where he didn't account for players. He's gonna have, even though he takes care of the football, but what he's not gonna do, he's not gonna make the same mistake over and over and over again. Jimmy Garoppolo is that guy. He's late over the middle, floating it over the middle, late in the down.
To his target and does not let go.
Locks onto his target. His feet are either rapid pace, pitter patter, or they're just literally like stuck in the ground and he cannot move them. So there's a huge inconsistencies in his game, and I see repetitive mistakes. And I think Jimmy is one of those guys that he's likable and people like him, but I don't know that he's I think Trey's a much more cerebral player than Jimmy, and I think you're going to see that. I think he's going to make mistakes this year, but he's not going to make them repeatedly. He's going to learn from his mistakes. He's going to grow. So, I would have loved to have seen him play instead of 2 games last year, more like 5. But you know what? It is what it is.
Honestly, I think that's one of the most refreshing analysis of what Trey Lance is now, what he could be, what he needs. Because I think a lot of people get so hyped up on where he was selected and how much they traded to get him, and sometimes forget about just the kid was 19 at the time he got drafted. Or 20, excuse me. He's now 22, and there's going to be some process that comes along with that. We understand that they are trying to refine his mechanics, and that isn't going to be an overnight kind of fix. It's going to be something that takes a lot of repetitions, not only in practice, but in the live bullets, because I think we did a film breakdown of the Week 5 game against the Cardinals, and you can see him going in and out between his new technique and his old technique. And when you started to see him rely on his older technique, he actually was being more accurate. He was being more fluid. It felt like the ball was coming out with more zip. It was when he was, you could see him trying to still play out those reps of how I should do it versus how I know and are comfortable to do it. But we understand that takes time. I think, my good friend Jordan Elliott, to me, he pointed out Aaron Rodgers mechanics coming out of Cal and how
the ball up by his ear and
and just how they completely refined his mechanics. And now we look at Aaron Rodgers, and he's one of the best throwers of the football that's ever played this game. And because of him being able to throw off platform and do all that kind of stuff, but you can tell they really went in and they did a lot of stuff to his mechanics. So I could see them doing the same thing to Trey. But again, I think the key point is just patience. He's like you said, a piece of clay that you just got to mold and take that time. And hopefully Shanahan and Greasy are going to be those guys to do it, because I think that's a good point you made with Greasy. We just don't know. He's never coached, right? It's definitely at the NFL level.
He played, but
he played at a high level for a while.
Yeah. And he's going to help Trey, I think, in a number of factors outside of football, just how to be a leader, how to, the moves that you make in the locker room, the moves that you make away from the facility, the decisions that you make, and how that reflects on the team and how that reflects on you. And I think he's going to be great for Trey in a lot of ways, but at the same time, they're kind of learning together. In a way, that's not a bad thing, because you know what? We've all had that teacher who's like, well, this is the way I've done it because it worked for, Jimmy, blah, blah, blah back. Well, you know what? Sometimes coaches and scouts do the same thing. He's like this guy. He's like that guy. All right. Well, he's this guy. This is who he actually is. So or you want to coach this player, or you want to just keep making comparisons to guys that he reminds you of? And I think Greasy, because he doesn't have that long track record of coaching, might be, all in just on Trey, and in the moment. I think that's going to be good for Trey. The most important thing, though, to me is, do you have the prerequisites, and do you have the desire, and do you love the process? And this guy's got all 3. So I don't have any. It may not be linear. He may be good this week and bad next week and good, but the arrow's pointing up, and he's going to get there. I really believe it. And the other thing is, look at Matt Ryan year 1 in Kyle's offense compared to year 2. I mean, it's a very complex offense to learn, and even guys who have been doing it for a while, they make a big leap forward in that second year. And a guy as conscientious, as hardworking as Trey Lance, I expect his jump to be immense. And I thought his jump from the Arizona game to the Texans game was immense. And I think one thing Kyle's got to remember is you have a quarterback more like a Mahomes who's got he's an athlete and he's got toughness and quickness within the pocket, but you don't have Lamar Jackson. He's not Lamar Jackson. So don't run him through the A gaps without lead blockers. You know what I mean? He's not a running quarterback. He's an athletic quarterback.
So don't use him like they did against Arizona is what you're trying to say.
Please don't. I mean, or I'll literally scream, because I pretty much did after
kind of
that
in
game.
that same boat. At least I can speak for myself, because when I went back to watch that Arizona tape, I was just like, whoa.
Why?
In its first start, like this is what we're doing. Like, what was the thought process? And of course, it's Kyle. He's a genius. He's been doing this his entire life. I'm sure there's a lot of rhyme and reason behind it. But as an observer, with the football knowledge that I have, I was trying to make it make sense. And I was like, it just felt like they put a lot on his plate, and using him in the fashion and they did, as the runs at the goal line and all that kind of stuff. I was like, what are we doing, Kyle?
Can we not dump it in the flat? Can we not have a couple shallow crosses across the quarterback's face? I mean, do we have to run the quarterback through the A gaps with no lead blocker? I mean, in that game, the Niners pushed back, but I said, screw you. I mean, seriously, they were, some of these guys were like, I was going to town because they were 16 runs in that game. They're like, well, a lot of them were scrambles. So I went and delineated the whole thing out. It was 9 scrambles in 7 quarterback runs. On the 9 scrambles, he averaged like 13 yards per scramble and took hits on like 3 of the 9 plays. On the design quarterback runs, he averaged like 3.2 yards per run and took a hit on every single one of them. So, all I would say is use him to scramble. Don't design runs for him, because he's going to take a hit every time. And unless you're dying to see Nate Sudfeld, I don't think I think I'd stay away from the design runs.
I love that you said that, because I agree 100%. It was just one of those things. I was racking my brain. I was at training camp last year, and they were doing the same thing. I think the very first team snap that Trey Lance ever took behind starting offensive line was a design quarterback power. And I'm just like, is this? Did we envision Trey to be a running back / quarterback, or is he just, like you said, is he a quarterback with the ability to escape and be able to extend plays, escape the pocket, do the Russell Wilson type things where you get out and you make plays down the field? That's kind of how I envision Trey when the 49ers drafted him. And like you said, not like a Lamar Jackson type, but that was just kind of my thoughts on it.
And Brad, then there's the people who want to agree with the franchise on every turn. And they'll be like, the reason Kyle had him doing all that is because he didn't know the offense. It's like, no. Sorry.
They had 2 offenses. Why don't you just have one offense?
Yeah. So what? So now you have to run your quarterback in power runs through the A gaps because he can't throw it in the flat, and you can't run a shallow cross, and you can't. It's just like it's the level of stupidity that people get to sometimes when they're in the process of defending the team just gets to, excuse me, you have no idea what you're talking about. Just shut up.
Yeah. I see you've been on Twitter recently.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, this has been a phenomenal conversation, Larry. I really do appreciate it. But before we let you get out of here, I do want to see if there's any other undrafted free agents that you think could potentially squeak in there and make the roster that maybe we haven't talked about yet. Because I think when we look at the overall draft haul, the draft picks and the undrafted free agent guys that they were able to get in, it just feels like they did a fantastic job at bringing in not only talent, but football players. Like we keep talking about when we keep assessing some of these guys, we keep coming back to, it just seems like they got a lot of football players, which is, I think, can be cliche at times, but I think is an underrated aspect that some people miss on.
Yeah, I mean, there's three guys that I really, really like that, I don't we talked about Tay Martin, but Tay Martin I really like from Oak State, who started at Wazoo and transferred to Oak State and then wound up, at the end of the year, he was Oak State's best receiver, and he had 3 touchdowns and 110 yards in the bowl game against Notre Dame. And he's physically not the strongest guy. He's about 185 pounds, 190 pounds, but he gets off the line of scrimmage, and he uses quickness to get off the line of scrimmage. And they called him Big Play Tay at Oak State, and I just think that he ran in the a total Jerry Rice mediocre 40. He ran like 4.55, 4.59 in that range, but if you watch him, Notre Dame had some pretty decent players on defense. He got open at will. He was the best player on the field in the Big 12 title game. He was the best player on the field in the bowl game against Notre Dame. So I love Big Play Tay Martin. I think he's going to be now. He's not going to separate that much, but I think red zone wise and with Trey Lance, I think he could be a real nice player. And he's 6'3". He's more like the size of a Jawan Jennings, but he's lean and plucks the ball with his hands. And he's a proven receiver. I really like him. I really like Quantrez Knight. A buddy of mine was a walk-on at UCLA, and he told me that Quantrez Knight was like the alpha on that defense, and he wore 24. He's a corner. He's very physical against the run. He's probably a special teamer, but I really like Quantrez Knight, what he brings to the table. He plays faster than his 40 time for sure. And then I'll say the North Carolina tight end, Garrett Wallston. They don't really have, I think, the tight end room between Kittle and Dwelly and Werner, and they still get Jordan Matthews, Tanner Hudson. But remember that name, Garrett Wallston. His body needs to be developed a little bit, but he's got nice ball skills. He's one of those guys that I don't think he's ever been in like pro football shape. So if he can get into pro football shape, I think they got something there. He's a tight end with nice hands and understands how to sit in the soft spots in his own defense. Understands where, what defenses, where the space is on the field. Like if you watch some of the Carolina film, he made some plays. They used 2 different quarterbacks, Sam Howell, but they used another guy as well. And this is a guy who understood when to sit in the soft spots, and he always seemed like he turned the right way away from the defensive back. So remember that name, Garrett Wallston, a tight end who I think is going to be in the mix for a roster spot, as at the cutdown.
Well, we saw last year Ross Dwelly, he got hopped by Charlie Warner. I was expecting a big year from Ross Dwelly. I was expecting that big kind of 4th year kind of maturity and just really bringing his whole game together, but it really felt like Ross took a step back, especially in regards to his blocking. Now I think he's always been more of a natural pass catcher, but his blocking and it was on full display in that Cardinals game to the point where they had to get Charlie Warner in there, and Warner from that point on kind of held that job. So I do think that tight end 3 position is up for grabs. So I think that's a great being able to identify the roster and where someone can kind of squeeze in if they come out and show out at camp. So I think that's actually a pretty good name to watch. But Larry, I do want to thank you, man, for hopping on. I want to thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks for having me on, man. Your channel's blowing up. And I should tell everybody, my 12-year-old found out I was on with Brad last week. He's like, Dad, you were on with Brad? And he's and I'm like, my wife even gives him a look like, your dad's been on radio for 20 freaking years, and you're losing your S over Brad. But dude, it just shows, it shows that you're putting out some incredible content. And, my kid is a very discerning 12-year-old. I always joke with him that he's a future talk show host, but yeah, he's all about your channel. And I've been watching some of the stuff you put out there and following you on Twitter through the years, but I never really drew the connection and never went to your YouTube stuff, and then went down the rabbit hole and watched a lot of your stuff. And it's great, man. So keep up the great work. And thanks for having me on.
Shout out your son, man. Shout out your son. What a legend. I love it. But also, we got it's almost 250 people in here. So I want you guys to help our guy Larry out. He's almost to 4K subs, literally right around the corner. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. do me a favor, do Larry a favor, head to the link, hit the sub button, because Larry is on daily with not only 49ers content, but Giants, Warriors, and you had Jake Hutchinson on today?
Yeah, we did. We went with Jake Hutchinson, and Jake he's a buddy of mine from KNBR.com, and he wrote a great little breakdown and embedded all these little highlight videos on his breakdown of the draft. So, the one thing I won't do is I won't bring people on my channel who I don't think are legit. So people are like, dude, you're a true scout. And I'm like, well, you know what? I am somewhat, because I'm scouting the people that I want on the channel, I'm
scouting talent in a different form.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do this for a living, you know who knows, and you know who's kind of faking it. And sometimes the bigger name guys are not the guys in the know. So I just wanted to, if you go to my channel, The Krueger Show, hit like and subscribe. I'll appreciate you. But more than anything, what you're going to get is you're only going to get guys who I think at least are bringing quality content, and we're going to talk tons of Niners. So, if there's somebody that I think's really good out there, guys I used to scout with, like Rob Rang's coming on this week from, he does the Locked On Seahawks podcast, and I thought Seattle had a great draft. So we're going to break that down, and some of my radio friends who I think are pretty knowledgeable, but absolutely if I feel like ball, and I don't even care if you've got 500 subscribers and you just started. That's the other cool thing, Brad, is I'm meeting some people that are starting their own channels, right? And some of them are just fans who just, are just enthusiastic. And I did an interview the other day, Brad, with a guy who was like 12. I mean, seriously, he's like, he was cute. I mean, he was asking me, he asked me 3 questions. He asked me 1 question 3 times. And I said, hey, I think that might be the 3rd time you asked me that. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. But you know what? I didn't care, because I was just like, you know what? I'm just starting. Yeah, and I'm just starting in this space, right? I've only been doing this for about 6 weeks, and I'm loving it. And I see other people who also are loving being in the space. And I think the community element of it is really cool. So, and I got a soft spot for especially, if you're a 12-year-old and you're out there hustling your own channel, you're going to be a successful person in life. I'm not sure how or what you're going to do, but man, you're way ahead of the average 12-year-old. So,
I mean, I didn't start at this until my late 20s. So if you're starting at 12, good luck. You're probably going to pass me one day.
You're going to be that.
All of us are doing this, because that's pretty legendary. But again, shout out to you, Larry. Thank you as always. We're going to have to get this set up on a regular. Let's
do it, man. Dude, you're the best, man. I mean, the one thing about you is you played. So, and I'm sure the people who follow you, that's a big part of why they follow you. It's not, the hat's nice and the beard's nice and the Willis and Trent Williams jerseys are nice, but you're pulling anecdotes off of actually putting on the pads and blocking a D tackle. And that there's a big difference between somebody telling you about a center who played offensive line and somebody who's telling you about a center and they basically have a subscription to The Athletic. I'll
be honest. Like, it's pretty amazing to watch, and I get it. Not everyone. You mentioned it earlier in the show. There's so many nuances of the game, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm the best at being able to identify coverages or identify shell schemes on a defense. But when we talk in trenches, well, that's a different story. I feel like I'm at home there. But I do appreciate
you have a doctorate in trench warfare. Maybe that should be your new business card. Brad, doctorate in trench warfare.
Print it. Get it printed right now. I want that. That's amazing. But thank you again, Larry, for hopping on. I'm going to drop the link in the chat one more time. Make sure you guys help us out. Get Larry to what? We're pushing to 4K.
4K. I think we're like 20 or 30 people away from 4K. So that would be awesome.
We got 200 people in here. We can do it. Get over there. Get to Larry's channel. Smash that sub button. And we're going to definitely be doing this not only for the rest of the offseason, but I can't wait to get some of your takes about what is going on in season, especially when training camp rolls around, when we're looking at these rookies for the first time, when we're getting to see Trey Lance and that development and what that looks like. So I cannot wait. Again, make sure you go follow Larry on his YouTube. Any other platforms where they can find you?
At Sports Larry K on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook. You know, I'm all over the place. I don't do tons on like Facebook other than like family pictures, and I don't do tons on Instagram except for, you know, pictures of my golden retriever and, you know, stadium pictures and that kind of thing. But I do a lot on Twitter, and I release my show just on Twitter and on YouTube. And we're having fun, man. It's been an absolute blast. And I've met more cool people in the last 6 weeks than I've met in the last 5 years covering the Niners. So it's really cool. I've nothing but respect for you, Brad, and the job that you do. So if you want to do something on the regular, I'm down for that. You just say the word when and where, and I'm there. So I appreciate you having me on, man.
Shout out to SDS. We see you guys. Make sure you show the love. Get that sub in for the Krueger Show. My guy is definitely a legend around here. So I'm very excited for this. I'm very excited that we've gotten to be able to connect like this, Larry, and I can't wait for future shows. But until then, everyone, you guys be good. Shout out to SDS. You already know. Best community in all of YouTube. We started off small. We're growing. Let's keep it going. Show the love to Larry, and let's get this thing rocking. I appreciate you all. Appreciate you, Larry, and we'll see you guys on the other side. Peace.